The old town of Black Ridge sat in the shadow of the mountains, its streets cloaked in an eternal mist that seemed to breathe, shifting and curling like living tendrils. At the heart of the town was an abandoned church, its spire leaning precariously, as if reaching toward some unseen horror in the heavens. The townsfolk whispered tales of the monster that lived beneath it, a creature of unspeakable darkness whose existence was more curse than legend. No one truly knew what the monster was. Some said it was a demon summoned by the mad priest who once ruled the church. Others claimed it was the result of a twisted experiment, a thing born of flesh and hatred. But all agreed on one chilling detail: its heart was still alive. The heart, they said, pulsed with a slow, dreadful rhythm, buried deep in the catacombs beneath the crumbling sanctuary. It was the source of the monster's power, and as long as it beat, the monster could never truly die. Eliza was new to Black Ridge. A journalist chasing ghost stories for a small-time online magazine, she thrived on debunking myths. But when she heard the tale of the monster's heart, she felt an unease she couldn't shake. This wasn't just another urban legend to dissect. It was something older, something alive. Her investigation began with the townspeople. None would speak of the church after sunset, and even in daylight, their voices would drop to whispers. The baker's daughter mentioned that her grandfather once ventured into the catacombs as a child and came back with his hair turned white. The schoolteacher spoke of screams echoing through the town on moonless nights. Sounds like nothing human. Then there was old Henry, the gravedigger. His hand shook as he told Eliza about the time he had to bury a body found at the church's doorstep. It was gutted, he muttered, staring into the distance. Like something was looking for something inside it. Eliza was no stranger to danger, but the warnings clung to her like the town's omnipresent mist. She armed herself with a flashlight, a crowbar, and her camera before heading to the church. The air grew colder as she approached, her breath fogging in front of her. The church's heavy wooden door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing an interior swallowed by darkness. The smell hit her first, a metallic, rancid stench that made her gag. The floor was scattered with broken pews and shards of stained glass. Symbols were etched into the walls, deep gouges that seemed to thrum with residual energy. In the center of the room lay a trapdoor, partially obscured by a rotting altar. It took all her strength to pry it open. A staircase spiraled down into the abyss, the light from a flashlight swallowed after a few feet. She hesitated, gripping the crowbar tightly, before descending. The catacombs were suffocating, the walls slick with something that gleamed like blood under her light. The deeper she went, the louder the sound grew, a faint, rhythmic thumping. B.A. dump, B.A. dump. It wasn't her imagination. The sound was real, reverberating through the tunnels. It felt as though the walls themselves were alive, breathing in time with a dreadful heartbeat. She turned a corner and froze. The floor ahead was strewn with bones, human bones. Some were old, brittle, and yellowed, but others still had scraps of flesh clinging to them. Eliza's breath came in shallow gasps as she continued, the thumping growing louder, more erratic. She reached a massive iron door, its surface covered in the same grotesque symbols from the church above. The door was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly as though it were alive. She pushed it open and stepped into a cavernous chamber. In the center of the room, suspended by chains dripping with viscous black ooze, was the heart. It was enormous, grotesque, its surface pulsating and glistening as though wet. Veins sprawled across the floor, anchoring it to the stone, their ends disappearing into the darkness. But it wasn't just a heart. It had eyes. They opened suddenly, unblinking and luminous, fixing on Eliza with a malevolence so raw it felt like ice slicing through her veins. The heartbeat quickened. B.A. dump, B.A. dump, B.A. dump. And then, from the shadows, something moved. Something massive. The air grew thick with the scent of decay as it emerged, dragging itself toward her, its form a writhing amalgamation of limbs, teeth, and glistening flesh. The monster wasn't protecting the heart. It was the heart. Eliza's body screamed for her to run, but she was frozen in place, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The creature before her defied logic, a grotesque fusion of raw muscle and bone, its jagged teeth gnashing as a gurgling growl reverberated through the chamber. Its eyes, those same unnatural, glowing orbs embedded in the pulsating heart, seemed to pierce straight through her soul. The monster dragged its hulking form closer, its many limbs scraping against the stone floor. A slick, viscous fluid trailed behind it, its stench overwhelming. "You shouldn't be here," it rasped, its voice like grinding stone and bubbling tar. The words didn't seem spoken so much as pressed into her mind, each syllable a dagger of dread. Eliza stumbled back, her breath ragged. The crowbar in her hand felt like a feeble twig against the mass of writhing flesh and hatred before her. What are you?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature laughed, a sound that filled the cavern, echoing with malice. "I am everything they fear. I am the hunger that sleeps in the earth. I am the truth they buried." It lunged. Eliza barely had time to dodge as one of its massive limbs slammed into the ground where she'd stood, shattering the stone. She scrambled to her feet, her flashlight spinning wildly, casting frantic beams across the grotesque chamber. The heart in the center of the room pulsed violently, as if feeding power to the creature. The walls themselves seemed to tremble with its rhythm. Eliza ran, her footsteps splashing through the slick, blood-like fluid coating the ground. The monster gave chase, its form surprisingly fast despite its bulk. The tunnel ahead split into several branching paths, but there was no time to decide. She darted left, the narrow passage forcing the creature to slow as it squeezed through. Her mind raced. She needed a plan. She couldn't outrun it forever, and destroying the heart, if such a thing was even possible, seemed like the only way to stop it. Up ahead, the passage widened into another chamber. This one was smaller, the walls lined with ancient, rusted tools and fragments of strained machinery. Eliza grabbed the first thing she saw, a jagged, broken blade. The monster was close now, its grotesque form filling the tunnel behind her. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, illuminating its ghastly grin. "You can't kill me, little worm," it snarled. "I am eternal." Eliza clenched her jaw, gripping the blade tightly. "Then let's see how eternal you really are." The monster lunged again, its many limbs reaching for her. She rolled to the side, slashing wildly. The blade sank into its flesh, and a spray of dark, viscous fluid erupted, splattering her face and clothes. The creature howled, a deafening sound that made the walls quake. But it didn't stop. Instead, the injury seemed to fuel its rage. Its limbs lashed out wildly, smashing into the walls and sending chunks of stone raining down. Eliza dodged and stumbled, desperate to keep ahead of its onslaught. Her flashlight caught something glinting in the corner of the room, a set of old, rusted chains hanging from the ceiling. They looked sturdy, anchored to a massive winch embedded in the wall. An idea sparked in her mind. She darted toward the winch, dodging another swipe from the monster. Her hands fumbled with the mechanism, cranking the chains downward. The noise was agonizingly loud, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the chamber. The monster charged, its massive body barreling toward her. At the last second, she dove out of the way. The chains swung down, wrapping around the creature's limbs and torso. Eliza scrambled to the winch, twisting it with all her strength. The chains tightened, pulling the monster back, its roars filling the cavern. But it wasn't enough. The creature thrashed violently, the chains creaking under the strain. The winch groaned as if on the verge of snapping. Eliza's eyes darted back to the heart. It was beating faster now, almost frantically. She realized then that the monster wasn't just protecting it. The heart was controlling it. The two were connected, one and the same. If she could destroy the heart, maybe she could end this nightmare. Ignoring the monster's roars, Eliza ran back toward the main chamber. Her feet slipped on the wet ground, but she didn't stop. The heart loomed before her, its surface glistening and heaving. Veins as thick as tree roots pulsed with a dark, sluggish fluid, spreading across the room like a web. She raised the blade, aiming for the largest vein she could see. And then the heart spoke. "Do you think you are the first to try?" it said, its voice cold and hollow. "They all fail. You will, too." Eliza hesitated for a fraction of a second, the weight of the words pressing down on her. But she thought of the town above, the people living in fear, the lives lost to this thing. "No," she said through gritted teeth. "Not this time." With all her strength, she plunged the blade into the vein. The reaction was immediate. The heart convulsed violently, a scream ripping through the chamber. The monster in the other room roared in agony, its body writhing against the chains. A torrent of black fluid erupted from the heart, drenching Eliza. The blade was still embedded, and she twisted it, cutting deeper. The walls trembled, crack spider webbing across the stone. But the heart wasn't done. The fluid began to pool around her feet, rising quickly. It was alive, lashing out like tentacles, trying to drag her away. She fought against it, her grip on the blade slipping. The monster burst into the chamber, its chains shattered, its form even more grotesque and distorted. "You will die here," it growled, its voice a mix of fury and desperation. Eliza yanked the blade free and swung it at the heart again, determined to finish what she'd started. And then everything went black. When Eliza woke, the air was still. The darkness surrounding her was suffocating, and for a moment, she thought she was dead. Her body ached, and the stench of blood and decay filled her nostrils. Slowly, she opened her eyes and saw faint streaks of light seeping through cracks in the chamber walls. The heart was silent now, its once vibrant pulsations reduced to a grotesque, deflated mass. The blade she'd used to wound it was still lodged deep within, its edges slick with a black, oily substance. But the monster was nowhere in sight. Eliza's breathing was shallow as she sat up, her hands trembling. The room felt colder, emptier, as if something vital had been drained from it. Had she done it? Had she killed it? Her moment of relief was short-lived. A low rumble shook the ground, faint at first but quickly escalating. The walls trembled, bits of stone crumbling from above. And then she heard it, a guttural growl, deeper and more resonant than before. The monster wasn't dead. It emerged from the shadows, its form even more horrifying than before. The loss of the heart had warped it further, stripping away any remnants of flesh and leaving behind a skeletal, otherworldly figure. Its many limbs were jagged and angular, its glowing eyes brighter and more feral. "You have ruined me," it hissed, its voice a guttural rasp that echoed in the cavern. "But I am eternal. You cannot destroy what was never alive." Eliza staggered to her feet, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. She had no weapon, no plan, and nowhere to run. The heart was destroyed, but the monster remained, fueled by centuries of hatred and darkness. "Then I'll take you with me," she muttered under her breath, her resolve hardening. The cavern was collapsing around them, the walls splitting open to reveal the endless, dark void beyond. Eliza's eyes darted around, searching for anything she could use. Her flashlight flickered weakly, casting frantic beams across the chamber. That's when she saw it. The ancient chain she'd used earlier, now scattered and twisted. One end of a chain was still attached to the winch mechanism, its gears exposed but functional. The monster lunged at her, its skeletal limbs tearing through the air. Eliza dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws. She grabbed the loose end of the chain and sprinted toward the winch, adrenaline overriding her exhaustion. The monster roared, the sound deafening as it gave chase. Eliza reached the winch, looping the chain around it and locking it in place. "Come on, you bastard," she snarled, baiting the creature. It took the bait, charging at her with all its fury. At the last moment, she rolled out of the way, and the monster's momentum carried it straight into the chain's path. The link snapped taut, wrapping around the creature's jagged frame like a steel noose. The winch creaked and groaned as Eliza cranked it, pulling the chain tighter. The monster thrashed and howled, its skeletal limbs flailing as it tried to break free. Asterisk, "You cannot contain me." Asterisk, it screamed, its voice a mix of rage and desperation. "Maybe not," Eliza said through gritted teeth. "But I can bury you." With a final turn of the winch, the chain pulled the creature back toward the collapsing heart. The remains of the pulsing organ seemed to react, its blackened veins writhing and reaching for the monster. The cavern shook violently as the heart's remnants latched onto the creature, pulling it into itself. The monster's screams were deafening, its body convulsing as the heart consumed it, merging them into one. The ground beneath Eliza's feet began to crumble. She stumbled toward the exit, the walls collapsing around her. The chamber was imploding, the ancient darkness devouring itself. She climbed the stairs, her lungs burning as she pushed herself harder than ever before. Behind her, the sound of the cavern collapsing grew louder, a deafening cacophony of stone and darkness. Just as she reached the surface, the church gave one final shudder and caved in on itself, the ground splitting open to swallow it whole. The sun was rising, its light breaking through the mist that had haunted Blackridge for so long. Eliza stood at the edge of the crater where the church had been, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. For the first time since she arrived in the town, the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had clung to the place was gone, lifted by the destruction of the monster and its heart. But as she turned to leave, she felt a faint vibration beneath her feet. B.A. dump. Her blood ran cold. B.A. dump. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, the heartbeat. Eliza stared at the ruins, her heart pounding. She had destroyed the monster, shattered its heart. Hadn't she? The sound faded, leaving only silence. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. It would never be over. And in the shadows of Black Ridge, the heart waits, its rhythm slow and steady, biding its time until the next fool dares to challenge it.